You're listening to The Real Deal Conversations, a podcast designed to encourage, inspire, and equip you by sharing real stories and meaningful conversations that bring real life to the surface. I'm your host, Megan Deal. Let's dive in. In 2006, my guest left a successful career as a criminal defense lawyer to start a bean-to-bar chocolate factory. His business model has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and numerous other media outlets. He, with his daughter, Lauren, wrote the book Meaningful Work, A Quest to Do Great Business, Finding Your Calling, and Feed Your Soul. He was named by the Oprah magazine, one of 15 guys who are saving the world. Please welcome my guest, Shawn Askinosie, founder of Askinosie Chocolate and Lost and Found Grief Center.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thanks for coming on. So real quick, I heard Shawn, first of all, I'm from Springfield and I know all about Shawn just from being local. I've also had his chocolate so many times, been to the factory several times. But it wasn't until recently that I heard Shawn speak as the keynote speaker at an event, and I heard some of his story that I didn't know about. And I was taken back, and I thought, that is powerful, it's profound, and I had to hear more. So what's in that story that I kind of heard, you talked about being a caretaker as a child. So can you kind of tell me about that?
Sure. My dad was my hero, and as many children think of their parents. And anyway, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, I think, when I was 12. And he was a lawyer like me, and a really physically fit person, former Marine, former drill instructor. We could talk for an hour about what it's like to be raised by a drill instructor. But anyway, so he was diagnosed and had surgery to take out part of his lung, and then chemotherapy and radiation and other surgeries. And so my mom really could not, this was really hard for her. You know, I mean, my dad was 46 when he was diagnosed. My mom was like in her mid to late 30s. And so she just couldn't handle it. So when I was 13, his pain, even though he was, and this is the way cancer is most of the time, it's a very up and down. Somebody can be at work one week and then not the next. And, you know, they can be in surgery or in the hospital for a few weeks and then they're feeling better. And that's the way it was with him. And so after about a year, he was in a lot of pain because the cancer had spread to his bones. So my mom could not give him pain shots, and I did it. So this was before hospice or anything. And the doctor came over and taught me how to do it. And I would do it at all hours of the day and night. And I have a lot of memories of that. And then it came to where I would be, you know, learning about whatever was going on with his cancer with my mom, and sometimes would help her explain it. And so I was very much adultified, but the problem was just made many times worse by our church. And the church, my dad was raised a Jew in New York City. My mom was a Southern Baptist from Miller, Missouri, and they met at Drury University. Okay. And so they decided, and he was Jewish and he converted when he was in the Marine Corps. But anyway, so we became Episcopalian, and that's kind of the result of Baptist and Jewish. And so anyway, so that's how I grew up in the Episcopal Church. Well, there at that time in the 70s, there was a movement, especially not uncommon. Well, maybe I should say it was a little uncommon, but in the Episcopal Church, there was what's called a charismatic movement. And that was at a different church, a different Episcopal church in Springfield. And so my parents changed Episcopal churches to go to this new charismatic Episcopal church where people spoke in tongues. And anyway, so there was a small prayer group of about 10 to 15 people, and they would come over to our house and they would lay hands on my dad and pray. And there were two women in particular who were leaders of the group, and a man. The man went on to found a really very, very popular church in Springfield. But the man told me, he took me aside and said, don't ever talk with your dad about death, because if you do, it'll be a sign of doubt and Jesus won't heal him. And the women said that too. And so then it got to where they were almost, in my in my memory of it, they were almost like angry. The way they would speak, and they would, quote, claim his healing, and they would rebuke Satan to leave his body, speaking directly to Satan. They would speak in tongues, which kind of freaked me out.
Yeah.
Which that's fine, but it kind of scared me. And then, and just to make this really long story longer, I was with him when he died, and he had been on a retreat from the church, a men's retreat at Assumption Abbey, which is a Trappist monastery south of Ava, that I have since now become connected to for the last 25 years, and I'm a family brother there. But anyway, my dad was there. He came home and he died that night after coming back from the monastery, and I was with him. Cancer at that time had been in his brain, and he basically had a stroke. And I was begging God out loud and to not let him die. I just begged for him to be healed then and for him to live. He died, and it was like around midnight. And then the prayer group was over there by 2 a.m. His body was still there. And the 2 women that I just mentioned earlier brought me upstairs to his bedroom, and they tried to raise him from the dead. Wow. And that was very scary.
And traumatic. I cannot imagine.
Traumatic. As if being with him when he died and it being kind of sudden.
Right.
It wasn't the kind of peaceful cancer death that we often hear about, and anyway, that's a really long story. I'm sorry to occupy the minutes.
And how old were you during this?
So I was 14 when he died. I was 14.
Okay. Yeah. And then how old were you when you started becoming his caretaker?
Just I really only did that for a year. Okay. So from when I was 13, I did it for about a year. And I mean, literally when I was on the phone with my mom's friend, and my mom that night explaining to my mom's friend what the doctor had said about his bone cancer. Yeah. And then my mom said, "Shawn, you need to come upstairs. You need to come upstairs right now." And that's when my dad and I, asked him how he was feeling, and he said he was feeling fine. And then he basically had a stroke. Wow. Cancer was in his brain.
I can't imagine, especially, 13, 14 years old, that's already a very pivotal age. You're just becoming a teenager. And then to have all of that intensity and to, I just can't imagine. And because of that experience, is that where your passion with Lost and Found came, to come alongside people in a different way?
Yes. And so Lost and Found Grief Center was founded 25 years ago, and I co-founded it with Dr. Karen Scott, who is a recognized expert in adolescent grief. And she's been my friend for a very long time. And we started that, and it was on the 3rd floor of my law office in the beginning, 25 years ago. But yes, that was to help children and families who've experienced the death of a loved one like I did, and hopefully not be as messed up as I became. I was going to use a different word, but this is a family-friendly show. And we've, in 25 years, we've helped over 20,000 people in 22 kids. Wow. And I'm still on the board of directors, and I'm a facilitator. So I facilitate a teen group with a coordinator who is an expert. And I've done that. I've worked with teens who've experienced the death of a family member now for close to 15 years.
Yeah.
Twice a month.
That's incredible. And I love that what you did with a tragic, terrible situation. That's, traumatic, and turned it into something beautiful for others, and in your ability to recognize things that were done very poorly, to be able to turn that around and say, okay, we're going to do this differently, and we're going to do it in mass in order to help people. So I love that. And so you became a criminal defense attorney. Did that career choice kind of, you say, that experience and how it kind of, put you on a certain path. Is that the criminal defense attorney? Is that kind of in that path? Is that kind of a part of that journey, that choice?
I think I would need to further understand but my dad also practiced criminal law.
Oh, okay.
So he did a lot of that. And he did a lot of civil rights work. And my dad was one of the founders of Legal Aid here in Springfield to help people who were impoverished and could not afford legal services. And I would go with him to these meetings at the courthouse and sit there when people, and he was helping people for free. So I grew up in that. And my mom was a community volunteer. And so that was just kind of part of me. And so wanting to do criminal law was just a natural progression of what, to kind of follow in my father's footsteps. And my dad hired Dee Wampler in the prosecutor's office. And I didn't know Dee that well, but maybe only months after my dad's death, he wanted me to come into his office and talk with him. And for those of your listeners who don't, he was a lawyer. He died last year. But anyway, he became like a second father to me. And he hired me to mow his yards, and then I started working in his law office when I was in high school. And he really cared about me and helped me. And I think a lot of young people, we all have friends who die and they're young and they have kids. And sometimes we don't know what to say. We're in fear that we're going to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing that won't be helpful. But one thing that matters really above all else is presence. And so I can say that there were teachers in my life, coaches, and families that really just kind of brought me in, and they weren't afraid. They weren't so worried that they were going to say or do the wrong thing that they didn't reach out. That a family in Springfield that went to church with my mom and dad, and that were, he was a lawyer, and they would have me over to their house on Sundays to play music. And they taught me how to play the banjo and the guitar. And that lasted through my life, and just being present with if you have a friend that has died and they have children, I really encourage you to reach out to the kids and just spend time with them. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It matters. I mean, I'm 63 and I remember this from almost 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Gosh, 50 years ago. Yeah.
I think it is the power of community, but you are right. There is an intimidation factor when you're not the one who has experienced the loss. There is an intimidation factor of, I don't want to make this worse, or this is what I want to say, but what if it comes, and there's all this overthinking, and it really is the common theme between people who I've talked to in these cases say the same thing. It's the power of community and just being present and not saying anything. You don't have to. It's just being their community. And even still, I think we can tend to take ourselves out of the game. But I really appreciate you saying that, because it just adds to the layer of the power of connection and just being there and not always having to say something.
Well, and that's what we do at Lost and Found. I mean, I facilitated a teen group last week. I'll do it again next week. And these are, 10 to 12 teenagers, and they've had experienced all sorts of different kinds of death. But, there's two facilitators like me and then our supervisor in the group, and we're just present. It's just present. Sometimes it's just listening. It's not giving advice. It's really facilitating the teens healing each other with their words and the connection that the teens have in the group. That's the power of group healing. But I just want to say that, for those who are intimidated or think they just don't know, or they sometimes think that praying hands on Facebook with the little emoji is enough. It's not enough. Please don't think it's enough. But here's the thing, we all have, not all, but many people have some kind of prayer life, and maybe it's only when the shit hits the fan and you're like praying at that moment. Okay, that's fine. But let me just say, and sometimes you're like, well, why should I do it? My prayers aren't answered. It just seems like it's. Let me just say this. Here's a prayer that will always be answered. It will never not be answered. If you pray that a path be illuminated for you to serve your deceased friends, family, the children, or whomever, that there be some opening for you to connect with them, to help them, that prayer will be answered. 100% guaranteed. If that's your prayer, just wait. It'll happen.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, write me, I'll send you a chocolate bar. But it'll happen. I promise.
Yeah.
It'll always happen. Always.
Yeah. And look for the opportunity and don't dismiss. I think too, people, they're looking for some profound thing to be the sign.
Yeah.
You don't need a profound thing to be the sign. Just go do it. Like just go do. If a door is open, walk through it. Don't wait.
Yeah. Don't wait.
100%.
Yeah. Just take them to get donuts or something, or this doesn't have to be complicated, you know, just go for a hike, or just doesn't matter, take them hunting or fishing or whatever.
Yeah. And it's so I was actually doing an episode last night talking kind of similar to this, not the same lines, but similar, and talking about how just go drop a gift off at the door, a meal or something that opens the line of communication, that opens the line of communication, and trust the process, and don't, be okay if something major, if it's a 5-minute conversation the first time, trust the process. Don't stop. Yeah. Right. 100%.
Maybe attend a sporting event or a theater event that they're in at school or something like that, just to show that you're thinking of them.
Yeah.
Well, and I can just say this too. What we're talking about right now is even more important as society becomes more and more disconnected. Yes. Young and old alike. It doesn't matter. We can talk about kids being on their phones all the time. Well, guess what? Adults are distracted as well. And this is, I think, one of the greatest challenges in our culture now is connection, and the fear of connection and the fear of friendship. And what we're talking about, I think, are some of the ways through that challenge.
So Chance Potts, he did a 2-part episode on the podcast. They lost their son, a teenager, in a tragic accident, and they used Lost and Found. And they actually, part of his testimony in that was how he didn't want to, because he didn't, it was like an avoidance of, I don't want to be in a group of other people who have had great loss.
Right.
And then talked about, being in Lost and Found and what that was like. And he also talks about the power of connection, the power of community, and the healing process, and who he is today, and how he's able to speak to people today with such a tragic loss, because of the power of community and connection. Right. So it is huge. It is everything, especially in a world, like you said, where we are transactional, we are in a technological age, and we are zoned out. And so even more the power of connection and community. But I want to kind of move over just a little bit, just for time. You were a criminal defense attorney, but and very successful at it. I mean, you didn't lose a case. Am I correct in saying that?
I didn't lose a jury trial. That's right.
Yes. So
I lost a lot of cases.
Okay.
But, if somebody was caught with 25 kilos of cocaine in their trunk and they opened the trunk and they admitted it, there wasn't a lot I could do.
Right.
I'm sure I lost that one.
Yeah.
But the ones that actually went to jury trial, no, I didn't lose.
Okay. So very successful. But at some point you realized that was no longer the path you wanted. So what did that look like, and where did that bloom?
For me, it looked like the feeling in my body. And for many of us who seem to be separated from our bodies, especially at a younger age, because we have this sense of invincibility. And especially when we're younger, we can, in sports and things like that, we take hits, we fall, and no big deal. We get back up and brush it off, and we feel no problem. So sometimes it takes a greater or a more intense wake up alarm. And in my case, it was just in my body, just feeling just a lot of heaviness. And despite my success, both professionally and financially and all of it, but there was just a feeling in my body. That's how it started. And I didn't pay that much attention to it, because it takes time to recognize it, especially when you're 40, and 38 or whatever. You just brush it off, especially if you're a fighter and you're motivated and you're ambitious. And Then I started sensing in my body things that kind of felt like a heart attack. I didn't know it was, now I know it was a panic attack. I didn't know what that felt like, but then I had to kind of figure that out. And so this was, so it started, to answer your question, it started in my body. And then I started actually bringing it from my body to awareness. So I was aware of it in my body. Then I was aware of my thoughts about it. And as I became aware of my thoughts about it, I then tried to explore them by any means possible. Perhaps it was reading, maybe it was talking to a friend, ultimately through prayer, and then through more service. And that's what happened at Mercy Hospital in the palliative care department. Still practicing law, realizing I couldn't do it anymore. I needed to do something else. So when that came into my level of consciousness, I was at that point on a hunt, and I said, I've got to do something else, and I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't have any skills. I don't have any hobbies. I don't know how to fix things. I'm not mechanical. I didn't take any business classes in college.
Yeah.
I wasn't very good in math, and I needed to figure something else out. And that became, I was pretty desperate. Yeah. That was a 5-year gig right there. Still working, still practicing law.
Yeah. And were you, so in that exploration, were you nervous or intimidated at all? Or did you put the pause button ever? Because you're like, what if I leave this and I fail? What if I leave this and this is successful? This is carrying me. Like, was there any intimidation, fear factor in that exploration to the launch of starting Chocolate?
No.
Okay.
There was zero fear. And the reason is because if there was any fear, it was subordinate to my need to get out.
Wow.
And so I had a need to get out, but what made it more challenging was whatever I was going to bridge to, it had to be something that I could be passionate about and be inspired by and be motivated by. That's what became really hard. For me, because I couldn't find it. I wasn't locating the trigger because I loved law until I didn't. I absolutely loved it. I was good at it, and it didn't feel like work to me. And then it stopped being like that. And, so let me just stop for just a second and let this be a warning. And the warning should be pause, because I didn't really know at the time that any fear I had was subordinate to my need to get out. And so, like, if somebody came to me, if I'd come to me now, like if my 40-year-old or 43-year-old would have come to me at 63, I would have really explored that with me. And I, as a coach or as a spiritual director, I would have really, because even in spiritual direction and in prayer and in talking with our spiritual mentors, we can become so driven to this other thing that we subordinate everything else to that. And we have to be very, very careful about it. And it requires a lot of discernment. And candidly, I did not have as much discernment as perhaps I should have. One of the things I kind of say to people and to myself is feelings, they're changing constantly, and they're also rooted in our life experiences and understandings, which means that they're not always accurate. Right.
And
yes.
So when we let feelings drive, when we let the feeling of fear or the feeling of intimidation, like all these feelings drive our decisions, we will be in a mess the rest of our life.
Yes.
We will never walk it.
Yes. And I also think that sometimes that if we're not careful and we don't have a good spiritual director or a spiritual companion or mentor, who we trust and who can check us and hold us accountable, then what we'll do is we will have a form of spiritual bypassing. And when we get together with friends, loved ones, whatever, we'll say, well, I'm really hearing that God wants me to do blah, 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 And it's really hard to argue with your friend when they said, well, in my prayers this morning or in my reading, I really felt the presence of God and I felt that God is leading me to this. And God said this to me or showed this to me. Okay, well, that number one, that's hard to argue with. But number two, it could also be true.
Yeah.
And it could be very true, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be checked by a wise mentor. And I think that it's worthy of rigorous examination.
I agree.
And discernment and further prayer and meditation. Because these are our lives that we're talking about and our families and friends. And so it's really, really important.
Yes. Or like other people's lives, when other people go, I believe Jesus told me this to tell you. And it's like, okay, well, I feel like Jesus would have told that person first, but that's okay. So we'll just, so yeah, no, I agree. Very hard to rebuttal, but yes, I always, seeking confirmation, kind of looking into the feelings of, is this rooted in life experience? Therefore, maybe a little fuzzy, need to get more of clarification, or because God can be very clear. He can be very clear. Yeah. In my experience, it usually comes with confirmation of what it is. And it's not just some willy-nilly thing, but so so to say, this path that you're on, you have no idea what direction to go in. You're like, where's my skills? What's the hobbies? So how did you land in chocolate then?
Well, during that time, that 5-year path, I'd co-founded Lost and Found at the beginning of that 5 years. I was working with kids at Lost and Found. So I was doing that work, so when my dad was on this men's retreat from the church that weekend of his death, he was at, as I said, Assumption Abbey, south of Ava. It's in the middle of the Mark Twain National Forest, and they have 3,000 acres and they make fruitcake to support themselves. But I didn't think about that place much. But at my dad's funeral, his priest said to me, no, not at the funeral, at the, the visitation, he told me that my dad, the night before he died, it was about 10 p.m. and he knocked on his door and he said, Don, that was the priest's name, Don. He said, Don, I've just been visited by 3 angels and they told me that I was going to die, that my family would be protected and everything would be okay. And he said, I wasn't dreaming. This just happened. I was fully awake when this happened. And he told me that at the visitation, and I could have cared less. Wow. It didn't matter. It didn't mean anything to me. And especially given what the church had said. Now, the priest wasn't part of the prayer group. He wasn't one of the mean people.
But naturally, it's easy to associate.
Yeah, sure. And so I didn't think about it for 25 years. Then I thought about it during this time that we're talking about in my trying to figure out what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And I went there and I started going there on retreat, and I've been going there for 25 years now. And for the last 10 years, I've been a family brother at that monastery. I have a spiritual director who's 93. He's been a priest for over 70 years, a monk for over 70 years. Yeah. He's still completely as sharp as you can possibly imagine, as sharp as he was when I met him 25 years ago. Yeah. And anyway, one day when I was walking by myself at the Abbey, on the road, I just felt this kind of to myself, I thought, maybe what I need to do is volunteer in palliative care. Palliative care is like hospice in the hospital, people who are dying. And I said, maybe I need to just do that at one of the hospitals in Springfield. And then what I'll do is I'll sort of right the wrong that happened to me by the church when I was 13 and 14 years old. So I went back and I tried to do it at Cox Hospital, where I had been on the ethics committee for years, but they didn't really have a volunteer program connected to palliative care. As it turned out, my 5th and 6th grade teacher at Hickory Hills, a man by the name of Mr. Elmore, was at that point in my life the HR director for all of Mercy. And he was able to connect me to the right people. And I did become a volunteer in palliative care, visiting patients on Fridays. I did that for almost 5 years. And these are patients who were dying. And I was with some patients when they died. But it was a lot of prayer with them. And instead of what happened to me as a teenager, I would always end my visit by asking them what they wanted me to pray for, or would they like a prayer? Mm-hmm. I didn't force it. I just said, would you like me to pray for you before I leave? Yeah, sure. What would you like me to pray for? I listened, then I would repeat their words back to them in prayer. And so I would almost always go back to the chapel at Mercy at the end of my visits, look at the list of people that I just visited, and I would pray over that. And the experience was often kind of otherworldly to me. And I couldn't, it was the opposite of the body feeling that I had, the tightness in my chest. Mm-hmm. It was the opposite of that. It was the opposite of heaviness. It was lightness. So much so that sometimes when I walked out to my car after being there, I thought I was like floating almost, mm-hmm. kind of above the ground. Mm-hmm. Not all the time, but sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so during that time of working at Mercy, but not actually at Mercy, but just during those months, I was driving to a funeral of a distant relative in Lawrence County. And that's when the idea came to make chocolate from scratch. Nobody was really doing that in the United States, except, like Hershey's and Mars, but not small mm-hmm. batch at that time. So within 3 months of that little light bulb moment, I was in the Amazon and learning how farmers grow cocoa beans.
Wow.
And now it's 20 years later and I'm making chocolate. But I quit my law practice pretty soon after that.
Yeah. So 3 months in, you just went for it.
Yeah.
You just went for it.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that's well, thank you. But as I was saying before, and you can probably tell, I'm kind of an intense person, and I don't often, I'm even at my age, I'm one of those people, I'll figure out how to build the parachute on the way down, let's
Same.
just jump and, there you go. Yeah.
Same.
And that has its, as everything, it has its sort of light and shadow side to it. And so again, it requires friends, companions, and mentors that can hold you accountable. And,
yes.
But yeah, no. And we often find, and this is a confirmation, like you were speaking before, mm-hmm. when we take a step, not on our computers, not, but when we just do something physical or we do anything that's a step toward the thing, we often find that there's like this conspiracy behind us to help us and to push us along. It happens.
Yes.
That's what I think.
I love that you just said that. It is something I say so often. Stop waiting for the sign and take mm-hmm. the step, do the thing. It requires one step. It does not require you to know the whole path. You take one step, and in my belief, God is going to open the door or he's going to close mm-hmm. the door. But either way, he just needs your one step. And so many people are like, yes, but there's never going to be a right time. There's never going to be a right time. I mean, yes, wise counsel, having your mentors, but there's never going to be a right time. It's like being in parenting. There's never going to be a right time,
Exactly.
And so
you're right.
Take the step and watch. It's fascinating when you take the step, the leap of faith into the scary thing or the hard thing, into the unknown, into the exciting thing, mm-hmm. and to see it, what one step can do, and then your next step, and then your next step, and and this is a perfect testimony to that, because Shawn took the one step, and mm-hmm. now look at what you have, a very successful company. You're doing amazing things because you took the one step, and I love that for listeners who. Okay, so I'm going to backtrack real quick. That got me mm-hmm. super excited. So I'm going to backtrack real quick.
Good.
So, okay, for listeners, so you started, you went into it. You are very successful. It is doing great things. But for anybody who has taken the step and they're in roadblocks or they're discouraged, they're in a lull, what would you say to them? Like, is there something specific you can use from your experience, a story that can encourage them to help them see press on?
Thank you for that question. I'm not sure I'm going to answer it the way you might like me to answer it, but okay. So when we're backing out of our driveways on a long trip and we're using Jeep, we can put the destination, 1,000 miles away. And what's really cool is you get to see the entire route. You can choose your route and it will show you exactly. But unfortunately, most all of the time, this is not the way our path is revealed to us. It is instead, you don't get to choose your path. And the only thing that you see in front of you is the GPS instruction to turn left out of your driveway. That's it. And so what it requires is to build a muscle of trust that I'm going to turn left out of my driveway and I'm going to see what happens. And then I'm going to see if the next instruction is go up to this stop sign and go the next 5 miles. And then and that is so hard, especially for people who want to have answers. They want to have certainty. They want the entire path revealed to them. It most of the time doesn't work that way. And what I have found is that, to more specifically answer your question, when those doors are closed, but we've taken the step, and maybe we've taken 2 or 3 steps, but it appears as if there are barriers and obstacles. That is when our spiritual directors and mentors and companions and friends are the ever most important at that point, because there is a discernment that has to happen. And that discernment is this an obstacle that you're intended to endure? Is it, as the Catholics would say, a paschal mystery? Is this a valley that there will eventually be the mountaintop? Is this the darkness before the light? Is this the death before the resurrection? We don't often know. That's why, as we were talking about in the beginning, and as you said, you used the word community. This is why community is so important, and especially people who can hold you accountable and people that you believe to be wise, because it's also possible that you should not do it.
Yeah.
That you should turn back around and go back to your driveway. And what I have learned is, and I appreciate you saying that my business is successful and it's doing great things. It is, and we are doing that. But don't think for a minute. I mean, I've been on a contemplative, spiritual, prayerful path now for 25 years. And don't think that I have it all figured out and that I have a path illuminated for me beyond turning left outside my driveway. Because guess what? I do not.
Yeah.
And the things are hard for me too now. And so what I have learned to do, though, is to say in my prayer that I don't want to know. And then what becomes a problem for us spiritually is there are times when we don't sense that presence, no matter what. And I'm not Catholic, but the Catholics call it a dark night of the soul. And we can experience that. Then we need community and friends and sometimes professional help.
Yes.
To say, is this depression or is this a dark night of the soul? But all that to say, I'm sorry I took so long to answer your question. But I just think this, if one of your listeners is saying, gosh, I thought I was supposed to do this thing and now the doors are all closed. The number one thing I would suggest that they do is find a mentor that they trust who is wise, that can hold them accountable, someone that they can really learn from.
Yeah.
That's really important. Really, really important.
Yes. And or if the doors have opened and then all of a sudden it's slowing down or you're in a lull or you're in a season, to lean into the growth that can happen in that. Because even in the Bible, I'll say this real quick, even in the Bible, like the Israelites, he put them on a long path because God saw war ahead and he knew they weren't ready to handle that war. And if they went up to the war, they would run back to slavery because that's what was comfortable. And so sometimes we have to have those slow seasons to prep us for what God sees ahead so that we don't run back to what was comfortable, which is not going to benefit us in any way. whatsoever.
Yeah.
So sometimes even when doors open, it can slow down. Lean into it. Don't get discouraged. Just say, okay, how can I learn? How can I grow? What do I need in this season for what it is that is ahead of me? There's, it's all perspective as well.
Yes.
So
yes, I think it is. I think it's perspective, but I also think that there's an element of humility to it. So if we want to be good followers, then we have to learn how to surrender. And that doesn't mean give up.
Right.
It means surrender and worship.
Yes.
And that is hard to do when you're a motivated, ambitious person that you feel called to do this thing.
Yeah.
But those things can coexist. Motivated people can also have humility, especially as they seek discernment and wisdom.
Yes. So good. Okay. So for time, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. I want to know the significance. You do things differently. You have an open book policy with the farmers that are, what's the word? Manufacturing your,
growing
the cocoa beans. So you have an open book policy. Please tell me the significance of that.
Sure. So I've been practicing open book management since I was a lawyer, and I did that for 5 or 6 years before I stopped my practice. But basically what that means is just sharing the numbers. We're transparent with our numbers and our financial statements. And so teaching employees what it means and showing what our sales are and what our expenses are and what our profits are. And so my idea when I started the chocolate factory was to do this for farmers, to take it upstream a notch in the supply chain. And so from the very beginning of our chocolate business, we have opened our books to the farmers in whatever language they need to understand them. So when I'm in Ecuador, they're in Spanish. And when I'm in Tanzania, they're in Swahili. In the Philippines, they're in English because our farmers speak English. But it's essentially a consolidated financial statement. So they can see every year how much we've sold of the chocolate that we made from their beans and how we calculate the profit share. And then every year we give them money back as a profit share. And we post it on our website. It's just a transparency document where we've listed every bean buy we've ever made from every farmer group, what we paid them and how it compares to the world market price. And it's about 55% more than they would have otherwise received at their farm gate.
Wow. So
this makes a difference in the lives of farmers.
Yeah.
In some cases, it really, really moves the needle. In others, I'm not going to claim that it does because it's not insignificant, but it doesn't change their lives. But in some cases, it does absolutely change their lives. Like in Tanzania, it does.
And you have a food program for the children. Can you tell me a little bit about that real quick?
Yes, we've started nutrition programs we have a nonprofit called Chocolate University Foundation. It's kind of an affiliated nonprofit with its own board of directors, a full-on 501c3. And people can learn more about that at chocolateuniversity.org. But gosh, we had our first school lunch program in 2008 in the Philippines, and we just started our 6th school lunch program in the Philippines 2 years ago for a classroom of kindergartners in this school that we work in who are severely malnourished, or they were. Now all of them are at normal weight because of our food program from a generous donor. And we've done 2 or 3 programs in Tanzania. We built a preschool in Tanzania for the farmer group, and we supply nutrition at that school as well. And yeah.
That is so cool. I love that. Well, Shawn, I am so thankful for this conversation. It was encouraging to me. I know it's going to be encouraging for others just to get an even deeper level of, behind the scenes of Shawn Askinosie and his and your why. So I love that. Thank you so much. Guys, we will see you on the next episode.